questions that the board had was about the affordability. Amendment 8 spells out the affordability. It is right on the second page on section 3. Oh, I'm sorry, no, that's building 9. It starts on page 1 under 2, and it goes on to page 3. That's the place where it's found. And the narrative also details the affordability here on the first page under income mix. With all that being said, I thought it was best to turn it over to the people from Hudson Related to provide an update to you on this, since we haven't heard from them. The board hasn't heard since the environmental impact statement was
Very
passed.
good. For purposes of tape and for our phone meeting attendees, Alonzo Robinson, our I did. Wow, I can't believe I forgot the name right. Our information officer is here, and present for Hudson Related, we have David Kramer and
Frank Monterison
and
More Adams.
More Adams. Okay, thank you very much. So,
thank you for having us. We are here for really two reasons. One is we sort of want to reassure and reassert what our affordable housing program is. And then secondly, we want to sort of articulate some of our anxiety that we are looking forward to working with RIOC over the next 45 days to close this project, because what typically happens with housing agencies is there is a delay to focus on projects towards the end of the June 30th calendar year and the December 31st year. And so there's a bunch of stuff we need to sort of finalize in order to close Riverwalk 8 by the end of the year. But for starters, why don't we talk a little about what Riverwalk 8 is? And when we initially came to the board a year ago, we had an affordable housing plan at different...
Sorry, David, I heard on the phone, Mr. Shanazaki, are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay, is anybody else still on the phone, or did somebody just call in? Okay, sorry.
So let's first talk about what Riverwalk 8 is.
In the meeting. Sorry.
What did he say?
sorry, that was garbled, Mike. Could you repeat?
Could they also email me the attachment that wasn't in the meeting request?
Yes. Arthur's going to email them to you now.
So for starters, the question is, what is Riverwalk 8? We had represented the area median income distribution we had in mind, and then we had asked for some cushion margin of error in case we weren't able to achieve that. And the good news is we were able to achieve the AMIs we represented. And basically, big picture, what has happened and why it's taken longer than we had hoped is that this project doesn't fit neatly into what affordable housing programs typically assume. Affordable housing projects typically assume either free city land, as opposed to the retail sale price we're paying RIOC, and they typically assume 8-story mid-rise block and plank projects in the outer boroughs, as opposed to a 21-story building. So our hard costs are higher than typical affordable projects. Our land costs are higher than typical affordable projects. So we've had to layer together different financing programs and deal with the fact that with 50 years left, with less than 50 years left, with 50 years left on the ground lease, there are some issues that our tax credit investors had to deal with. So for now, for some more details, I'm going to ask Jamar to sort of go into greater detail on the housing programs and the AMIs for the building.
Thank you, David. So the housing programs and how they differ for just ever so slightly from what was in the Fifth Amendment is that in the Fifth Amendment we had 20% of the units at 50% of AMI, we had 30% of the units at 100% of AMI, and we had 50% of the units at 130% of AMI. And so how that has stayed the same is that we still have 50% of the units at 130% of AMI. It has changed because now we have we have 3% of the units So 10 of the units are set aside for formerly homeless. And then those units will be rented at 50% of AMI. We have 3% of the units set aside at 40% of AMI, and then 14% of the units set aside at 50% of AMI. So before you had a 20% at 50%, but now you have 3% of that at 40, 3% of that at formerly homeless, and then 14% at the 50 that we said before. Now we have 10% of the units set aside at 80% of AMI, and the reason that occurred is because what David was referring to, we had to layer onto the project the inclusionary housing program, which is the voluntary inclusionary housing program that the city allows for, to provide for additional financing, so that we could actually build the job and construct it. So we have 10% of the units at 80% of AMI, and then 20% of the units at 100% of AMI. So again, comparing to what we had before, 30% was at 100% of MI. Now, basically a third of those units have dropped down to 80% of MI. So the building has altogether become even more affordable than it was previously. And so that is, the variance from what we presented to you guys before and what's in the Fifth Amendment to the ground. Fifth Amendment to the development agreement.
So basically, if anybody was concerned about a bait and switch, this is the opposite of bait and switch. We've come back with more restrictive, lower income, affordable units. A, because we are amazing individuals, and B, because these are obviously the housing programs have very specific allocations for formerly homeless, not 50%, 40%.
Right.
And we are just trying to comply with all of the sort of interweaving regulatory requirements of HPD, HDC, HCR, and RIOC. We just throw acronyms at everything to put this deal together. So that is the project, and so we're here to sort of reassure that whatever affordability we promised, we are following through on, and in fact, as Jamar just pointed out, it's actually more affordable than what we previously represented. So that's number one, and then number two is the whole question of the mechanics of just signing the ground lease. And for the previous 7 projects, the board approved the deal and then authorized staff to finalize the ground lease. And I'm a little unclear about exactly whether we have that authority today or whether a subsequent board meeting is required. But from our standpoint, we just want to be able to have some flexibility with staff to finalize the deal and to basically deal with whatever affordable housing requirements come our way that changes the ground lease slightly from the last 7 buildings. We basically have a template for the ground lease that we've developed over time through 7 buildings. But when you're doing an affordable housing project, HPD and HDC may say, their lawyers might say, well, we want to have this language in there about the mortgage, we want to have this language in there about the long-term affordability. And so there are a few issues that we have been going back and forth between, and Hudson Related is sort of in the middle here. We have our lenders' attorneys and the agency's attorneys have been going back and forth with markups with RIOC's attorney. And we're just trying to get to the finish line before the end of the calendar year. Frank, is there anything to add to that?
Just that we're, from a deadline perspective, there's we have to kind of get a lot of the stuff finalized over the next couple weeks, so that we can move forward with all the other agencies.
When this was before the board, when the amendment was before the board in the September board meeting, we stated that we would be going back to the board for the lease. We had asked the board if they are available November 20th for a meeting for this one agenda item. I have 3 board members who have indicated that they are, so that means there is a quorum of a board that can meet on November 20th to vote on giving RIOC staff the authorization to enter.
That's terrific. That's great news. Frank can. That's good news
and
for.
Maybe more RIOC board members will respond that they will be there too.
And the ground lease is a scintillating document. I recommend everybody. It's a page turner.
The amendment mentions buildings 8 and 9. The narrative only refers to Riverwalk 8. What's the scope of the agreement?
It's the lease for building 8.
8.
I think the development agreement covers both buildings, but this particular lease will cover
You're
building
gonna
8.
have to talk louder.
I said the development agreement covers both buildings, but this particular lease will cover building 8.
Thank you.
And we are about to start work embarking on the design work for building 9.
Personally, I'm confident that everything has been done to ensure affordability, which is the main issue that was holding up the agreement. I'm prepared to recommend we move it forward and bring it to the attention of the board at the next meeting. That's just my personal opinion.
I think that would be a sense of the committee. We were in agreement back in September last year about the large moving parts of the project. With details needs to be worked out. We wanted to see the amendment to see if these terms were actually encapsulated in the final language that we're working with. And we're hoping that we would have a broad brush narrative. We have these narratives to look over, and any background material should be available to us in time for a special meeting, so we can move this project forward, which is one more important thing for the city, to have an affordable development added to the island would be a wonderful thing. So my sense is that we would be interested in seeing this move forward if everything seems as it now appears.
Yes, we're working on the
Thank you.
lease.
Make it
as
pretty.
David said. So our hope is that the lease is
We have the
finalized
same
by the
we have the
20th.
same architect that designed building 7, which is a market rate rental. So one will be walking down Main Street looking at building 7 and 8, and they will be designed by the same architect, and nobody will be able to say, oh, that's the affordable housing project with the lower AMIs, and that's the market rate rental. They're basically buildings
to be
speaking to
designed.
each other.
Okay, well, we have a few
Now
things to
there's a
read.
question from
From the public.
Oh, the public has a question.
Yes.
I'll recognize Rick O'Connor, Roosevelt Island Block.
Thank you. So what is the AMI for Roosevelt Island?
86,000.
I think it's a regional number.
Yeah,
It's
it's not
86,000.
the-
Yeah, it's
Lisa was 3 days ago.
it's the AMI that the incomes for the project are based on is for New York City.
Okay.
It's not specifically for Roosevelt Island, it's for New York City.
And it's not just the Upper East Side, it's the entire city?
Yes.
And Rick, I mean, what we can share with you is that what the AMIs translate to for both income limits, income minimums, and the actual rent.
And when do you think you're gonna start the lottery proposal, the lottery system for the apartment? Is that how it works? Is a
We
lottery?
did not mention the benefit for Roosevelt Island residents.
That's right, we did not discuss that. We will discuss that now. So, typically the lottery begins like 9 months before completion, something like that.
Yeah.
So if we're starting January 1st, 2019, and we're finishing January 1st, 2021, so in the spring of 2020, we'll start the marketing process. The way citywide the preference system works is by community board. So there will be, actually, Frank, why don't you talk about the different preferences that are in addition to the community board?
So HPD is the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. That's the city agency that regulates and administers affordable housing throughout New York City. They have 3 standard preferences for a new affordable housing project. One is for audio and visual impaired residents. 2 is for municipal workers. And 3 is for community board residents. So for this project, we'll get all 3 standard HPD preferences, and so it'll get the this project being on Roosevelt Island, which is part of the community board 8 for Manhattan.
Has HPD taken the position that it is not acceptable to prefer Roosevelt Island residents?
Jamar, you spoke to HPD, right?
Yeah, so they have stated that they are going to stick with their general parameters for purposes, the three that Frank just mentioned, and they are not going to move forward with any additional preferences for projects for in moving forward.
Does that mean they won't do the deal if that's what we asked for?
That means that they said to me, I asked very directly, and they said, we are not adding any additional preferences.
That doesn't answer my question.
I-
Is that a condition to get?
Yeah, I mean,
this
that's
deal
the
done?
way, HPD,
I have a
yes.
simple question.
The answer is yes.
Okay.
You have to play by HPD's rules when you work with HPD. And as we were discussing earlier, HPD has citywide criteria. And with the exception of Roosevelt Island and maybe City Island, most neighborhoods are kind of fluffy and gray where they end. So, HPD doesn't give a preference to Chelsea, because where does Chelsea begin and end? Where does the Upper West Side begin and
I
end?
get it, but this is a unique place.
So we asked. We asked
Okay.
specifically
If you asked and
because,
got the answer, I'm
yes.
fine with it.
no, because, and in fact, our interests are aligned. We would love to give the preference to specifically Roosevelt Island residents. We think that'd be great. So, we would push for that if we could.
Okay.
Another member of the audience, Margie Smith.
Thank you. Can you define preference? What does that mean? You set
Can't
aside
hear
a
you,
certain
Marty.
number. I said, can you define preference? What does it mean? Setting aside a certain number of apartments, or you just get first choice the lottery, or what's the preference do for us?
So essentially, what happens when they do the lottery, you apply for the lottery via a digital system that's a website, New York City Housing Connect. So the city moved to this system a few years ago, and I think it was 5 years ago or so. They moved to so you can apply to. There's every affordable housing product in the city is on this website. So it makes it very easy for people to apply to affordable housing. Versus before, it was like a paper application to one project. Now you can get on one website that has all of them. So you get onto the website, you apply for the project, and then when you apply for the project, you're put on many of these projects will get 90 to 100,000 applicants for each project. And when the developer receives a list from the city, as David said later on in the project during the marketing period, the preferences essentially means you get kind of bumped to the top of the list.
But one person gets bumped, or 50, or 100, or
No,
how many people get bumped?
If you qualify for one of the preferences, you'll go to the you'll get preference over the other applicants on the list. That's what the
Aren't there
preference means.
percentage set asides, like X percent?
There is, I believe it's
25% for the community board.
that's 50 usually for the community.
So it's
board.
50 for the community board. Is it 25% for municipal workers?
I believe it's I know it's 50 for the community board. I believe it's 5 for municipal workers, and I believe it's 7 for audio visual impaired. But that's off my memory.
But the good news for Roosevelt Island is that if it is 50%, we have 300 and how many apartments?
341.
340. So if 170 apartments are specifically for people who live either in the Upper East Side or Roosevelt Island, and everybody on Roosevelt Island is going to know about this project, and whether people on the Upper East Side have the need or qualify or know about the project, it is there's probably some decent likelihood that you have a decent shot, as opposed to competing with the 80,000 people
Right.
Through the citywide lottery.
But yeah, as we stated, the preferences will be kind of stated to us by HPD and we put in the regulatory agreements. We don't really have the ability to negotiate those. HPD tells us what they are.
Is that 50% per AMI category, or is that for the entire building, the preference?
I actually am not really sure of the answer.
I assume it's by unit type that it's.
So it'd
An
be,
interesting discussion going on down there.
Yeah.
Can we move along?
maybe you guys should.
So,
It's at least far from here.
I think we're done on this point.
Just an area.
And thank you.
Okay, thank you.